All right, the band is back together again, episode 36 of the Sumer Sports Show. I'm Eric Eager. I'm joined by Thomas Dimitrov. Thomas, you are in Aspen. In that you were there Monday as well. We had really good fill-ins by Tage Seth and Parker Fleming, but I gotta say, I was a little bit uncomfortable with them. It was just like obviously you and I have built this up. Those two had built something up, and like I felt like kind of a third wheel on Monday. We're back here. We're going to talk quarterbacks. But you obviously have the great backdrop behind you there.
Look at that crazy backdrop. It's at my good friend RC Buford's house. We're in Aspen. We're trying to get away a little bit. Spring break with the kids. We all know how important that is, and so it's been great. A lot's been going on. Of course, happens to be a lot of quarterback related. When we start talking about franchise tags, I can't wait to talk about it more. Really excited about jumping in. You're exactly right. It feels like it's been forever, but it's only been a week, right, since we've been on together.
That's the thing I was thinking about Monday night. I was playing video games with my daughter, and I was like I'm driving to Indy that night, right? And then we do Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. Those are like really, really long days in Indianapolis for the combine. And then, you're out a little bit later than, you normally are those nights. And then you go to Sloan, we get there on Thursday. Jack Jones, our one of our founders and the COO of the company, did a wonderful job during his presentation. Sean Clement and I did our presentation early Saturday morning, and then of course you did the football analytics panel with yourself, Jacqueline Davidson, Seth Walder, Steve Palazzolo, and Kevin Demoff, which was really cool. You guys talked about all kinds of fun stuff about the draft, positional value, and all those good things. We are going to, by the way. Because the last time you and I were together on this show was Monday last week. Since then, Sumersports.com has gotten a facelift. We've put all of these podcasts on that website. We've also published 4 articles, one on weak link systems, one on the mid-range jump shot for quarterbacks, sort of relating that to basketball. We've also talked about the yak and where that comes from. Does it come from the coordinator? Does it come from the receiver? Does it come from the quarterback? And then we also talked about the coaching decisions. By the way, what was really cool when we went to Indianapolis was how many teams are already reading and consuming some of this content that we get. We love that. We love being, a source of entertainment, not only for people in the league, but also a source of edification for folks that want to learn more about football analytics, Thomas.
Look, I want to add and laud you, because here you are with an incredible brain that I continue to say about, but your understanding, I know I've mentioned this before, understanding of football, having played football, along with your really, really deep understanding of mathematics and football and analytics. To me, I think anyone in the league, rising executives that are already there, if they have the time, I would press them. I would call all of my contemporaries and say, 100% you need to listen to Eric Eager, wax poetic about his ideas. And they may not be in line necessarily with everyone as a general manager, but what they can learn, as well as Tej Seth and Parker Fleming. I mean, I think they do a great job. I'm just really excited about being able to disseminate some really good information. And by the way, that word disseminate's not too big of a word, I hope, for some people out there.
Yeah, I what I really enjoyed, and obviously we won't give away any of the actual conversations we had because they were obviously somewhat privileged, but like we were just sitting there on one of the days, and we were just everybody's there is mathy, I think, including you, Thomas, and but we're just talking football. Like what are we looking for in quarterbacks, as we're going to talk about today? What were we looking for in defensive backs? What were we looking for mentally? And obviously, I think, if you don't have football analytics has come a long way. We talked about that at our Sloan talk. It's come from the Virgil Carter days all the way to the Jim Palmer, the books in the 80s. And then, you get to now the public facing stuff of Brian Burke and folks like that. We've come a long way, but I don't think we're going to get much further unless it's guys like me talking to guys like you and building metrics based upon trust and what you're looking for. And this was always my thesis, and one of the reasons why, I felt like once you and I started working together, it would be fruitful was, I do not think that, I do not think that we're going to be able to do as much apart as we can do together. And there was a ton of conversations at as both Sloan at the combine that I think reinforced that truth.
I think guys, to that point, guys like Kevin Demoff, to be on that panel with him and to hear him talk about, his approach with the Rams and Les Snead's approach, them together. Look, he's a really important part of analytics in the NFL as well as, there are a number of people. The more we can continue to, again, humbly and respectfully edify people, I think that is going to go so far in our league. And again, I get so excited about it. Every once in a while, I think about those earlier days from 2008, with Mike Smith through probably 14, where my mind wasn't closed, but I was so overwhelmed with everything that was on my plate. As much as I wanted to learn more about analytics and how we would be that much more advanced with our approach, we never truly got there. What you and your group can do, I think, for the NFL is beyond evolutionary in my mind. And I think we're on our way. And again, I'm so excited we talked about this, to have our group. We continue to grow. Hopefully we're growing with another 15 plus people in the relatively near future. I just think the world is everyone's oyster right now in the data and analytics side of things.
Yeah. And obviously, not to fill this inbox even more, because people have already filled it out. And Thomas, you've been incredibly popular since we went to the Super Bowl. And I feel almost like your wingman. People have been like, hey, Eric, love what you guys do. Can I get Thomas's number? Like, that's been a lot of it. And I think, you've been, we talked about this today, but I think football, everybody loves football. It's our nation's religion in a lot of ways. Right. And, I think where analytics in every sport provided a threat to that, right? You did not want to codify away the things that the hair on the back of your neck that stands up when Harrison Butker kicks a game-winning field goal in the AFC title game. The feels that you get when like you called it, take a magnet off the, put a magnet on the board, like all those kind of stuff. Like, I think that obviously having people who respect that tradition and actually just want to enhance that tradition more than they want to take it away or change it, I think is huge. And of course, everybody in our building is so much, I think, towards that aim, that I think people are going to be more likely to work with us. And here's the point: like, when you were at the beginning with the Falcons, the issue is trust, right? Like, once you get, your job becomes, as Jack Easterby would say, multifactorial, right? Yeah. You have to delegate to people. And if you're a person who's never met a mathematician before, you're not going to delegate any of your work to a mathematician, right? None of it, right? You're just going to delegate your work to football people. And why wouldn't you? That's natural, right? But as our hope is that, as we grow, the math people will just be football people. That's a hope. That's my dream. But also, just like the general managers who, have a difficult job, will, delegate to a more diverse group, and it'll grow the thing up. Because again, that's the point. Your job as a general manager is too hard to do it by yourself. It's who you delegate it to that is really the frontier here.
You had a great line earlier on today when we were just ruminating on a lot of different things. And your point to me was, Thomas, whenever we're talking to these sort of historic people in the NFL that are still holding places, whether it's at the coaching level or whether it's at the GM level, there are so many people out there with unbelievable football brains, making sure that we stress to them as we are evolving from the analytics side, to stress to them, we'll never take you too far from the throes of football at the core. And that's going to be an important part as we are getting people to believe that you can augment properly with everything analytic that you all are doing within Sumer Sports. I'll use that as an example. And they are able to really tap into that and realize that there is so much there at their fingertips that they need to tap into to make them that much better. And I love seeing people more understanding and open to it. Even being at the combine, even though people are saying, look, we are still maybe a year away, I am so interested. I do not want to lose touch with you, Thomas. Stay in contact with me. Even though it might not be this off season, I'm there. So that's exciting.
Yeah, for sure. And what's really fun about the combine is obviously it's a week. You get the Super Bowl. We all kind of exhale. You get a couple weeks, then you go to the combine. You have all this, it's great stimuli if you're an NFL fan or observer or worker like we are. And then you rush right into this week. And this week is where we get, Derek Carr signs for 4 years, $150 million with the New Orleans Saints. cap constraints be damned in that case. Daniel Jones, we've already got some Daniel Jones content in the comment section. Daniel Jones goes for 160. It's not quite that big or long, but it is what it is. Geno Smith goes for 105. Imagine saying that just like 12 months ago that Geno Smith gets a $100 million contract. And then we have a couple things that aren't finalized, but Aaron Rodgers is visiting with the Jets, and Lamar Jackson gets not the traditional franchise tag, but the non-exclusive franchise tag, the one that pays him $32 million this year, but allows other teams to negotiate with him. That's a lot, right? That's a lot there. I think, I made my piece last week and I said, look, I would not extend Daniel Jones. But the Giants clearly disagree with me. I've never been a huge fan of what Derek Carr offers as a franchise quarterback, but I understand what the Saints are doing. And obviously Geno Smith is one. I think that's still a deal that they can still draft the guy, even if they want to at 5. But they're certainly rewarding him for a great season. I sort of want to get to the last two guys. I want to get to Rodgers, Aaron Rodgers, who is kind of in this process of probably being traded. What would you say for him? Because I know he's been a great quarterback in the league for a long time. I mean, his starting career started when you became a general manager with the Falcons in 2008. And, he was at the down year this year. Packers kind of look like they want to move on. Jets kind of that team that really could just use a quarterback to step in. What do you think about that possible pairing?
I think the Jets bringing him there, I think would be ideal at this point in his career. I mean, I have said this categorically. I think he is one of the very best to come through the ranks as a quarterback in this league. Whether he agitates people or not, personality-wise, I think moving over from Green Bay and the Green Bay faithful over to the Jets with a coach and a general manager there, team builders there, as it were, I think that's what that group needs. That group, I think Joe Douglas, as a football man, has a really good understanding of where he needs to go. It's a vital time for that organization. Offensive line-wise, they're going to sell him on that. They're going to sell him on the idea that he could come to an organization in a city that's going to be behind him, which I think is vital. And, he can be himself there. I think it is a really good opportunity for him to thrive there and make that push to be a Super Bowl champion again.
Yeah, I'm not a huge, I think Aaron Rodgers has done a lot to kind of make his reputation a little bit different. I think 5 years ago, all of us would have said, look, Aaron Rodgers is not only a guy that we respect as an opponent, but we fear him very much. When the ball is in his hand at the end of the game, you're scared, right? I mean, he's an amazing quarterback, and he, of course, has won 2 MVPs even in the last 3 years. I think that, his statistics last year were better than they looked. They were also very similar to Tom Brady's last year in New England. So he goes and look, this Jets team, more high profile than Tampa Bay was. Don't get me wrong, but Tampa Bay's team, the year that Jameis Winston threw 30 interceptions, they had a pretty good defense if you look at some of the underlying metrics. Shaq Barrett had 19 and a half sacks. They had Pierre Paul. They had linebackers in White and Levante David. They had 4 day 2 picks in the secondary. They were ready for a winner. And Brady went in there, won a Super Bowl in year 1. This Jets team, very talented, right? You're looking at, the CJ Mosley type linebacker. You're looking at Sauce Gardner. You're looking at, Quinnen Williams, one of the best interior defensive linemen in the game. And to your point, Elijah Vera Tucker, an interior lineman who's quite good. Garrett Wilson's the offensive rookie of the year. You have Breece Hall, coming back from injury at running back, and a couple tight ends that I think are fairly solid. So you bring him in there, and I think, look, when they were going after Derek Carr, my thought process was, look, Derek Carr could have won you the 2022 AFC East, but he can't. If things go badly with all the players I just said, he's not good enough to elevate, right? You put Rodgers on that team, and if things go a little poorly, Rodgers can elevate your team. And so that's why I like shooting for the moon with a quarterback like that on a team like the Jets.
And he comes in there. He's obviously been at loggerheads with his coach in Green Bay, hands down. There's just a lot of elements there that I think for him to jump over, to be with Robert Saleh, and again, Joe Douglas as a team that's going to be behind him, excited about having him there, and there not being this back and forth battle, I just think is refreshing for him. I really believe that he has years left in him, and I think he can do special things. It's so tough, of course, to get a quarterback like this. By the way, what is his exact number, and what's the breakdown, if you don't mind, for 30 seconds?
Yeah, I think it's the first year it's going to be about 60 on the cap, or sorry, 60 cash and about 15 on the cap if they trade for him. So, not a terrible one. Again, I think people are being, sort of educated a little bit about, and when we talk about Lamar, about like the ownership has to put that money in escrow. Like that's not a trivial thing for some owners. But they basically prorate that money over the remaining, I believe it's 3 years of the deal, 4 years of the deal. And so you can spread out that initial hit, but it's not an expensive contract for the Jets, at least in year one relative to the cap. I don't have the very specifics, but those are the broad numbers. It's a heavy hit right away, but it's spread out from a cap perspective. So it's not terrible, and it's one of those, again, like if you're the Jets and you wait. So I'm a big time draft quarterbacks guy, but at some point you've already missed on Darnold, you missed on Geno Smith, even back in the day, Geno Smith, Darnold, and then Wilson. It's like, if you take another swing at QB, some of your great players are going to become older and you just miss your window totally. And you look at Douglas, you look at Salah, it's like, you don't get infinite chances in this league, right? It's the whole, the market can stay irrational longer than I can stay solvent sort of thing, right? Like at some point you got to buy some certainty. And I think Aaron Rodgers, with, the chip on his shoulder, no one's really better in the NFL with a chip on his shoulder than Rodgers, other than maybe a couple guys. And to me, it makes sense, even though, you would prefer a team with that kind of young talent to have a young quarterback. It just hasn't worked out yet.
You hit the nail on the head. To have some certainty, and some people out there would argue otherwise. But look, that idea, we could talk about this as well, to move up to Chicago, for the Colts, right? To move up, let's just say, there's no certainty there. They have their own situation, as you're mentioning, with veteran talent that has not necessarily worked out for Chris. We've talked about it a number of times, but there's no certainty at the number one overall pick. You do know what Aaron Rodgers is, back to the Jets, right? You know what he is, you know what he can do. It's not like he's lost his talent. So I think going into these really, really important times for a GM and a head coach, to me, this is a smart way to approach it.
Yeah, for sure. And it would not be the first time the Jets have acquired a Pro Bowl MVP quarterback. Of course, Brett Favre in 2008. Boomer Esiason, people forget that he was a Super Bowl and MVP quarterback. They acquired him in 1993, a Long Island guy there. And obviously Joe Namath was their quarterback the whole time. So this is a place that has required star power at the position to even stay above. And obviously, if you look at cultural icons, they also acquired Tim Tebow in 2012 after Peyton Manning usurped him on the Broncos. Lamar Jackson, this one's weird, right? Very weird, because we talk about, and obviously he's been rumored to the Falcons. Right now, it doesn't look like the Falcons are all that in on him. The Falcons do have somewhere around 60 effective cap, 70 total cap in room, so they could bring him in. It would require 2 first-round picks now. That would be, the charge there. Everybody's talking about Michael Vick, but I do want to bring something up that I think is very pertinent to this discussion. So everybody's talking about Michael Vick. Michael Vick was the first 1,000-yard rusher at the QB position in the modern NFL, but he did so with over 2/3 of his rushing yards on scrambles, so plays that were passes that he ran on. Lamar Jackson, when he rushed for his first 1,000-yard year, 2/3 of those yards came on designed runs. So even though statistically there were similar guys, how they went about it was totally different. We are dealing with, in Lamar Jackson, the first of his kind, a quarterback who runs the ball on designed runs with a slender frame. And I think that there's an aspect of uncertainty that is clouding this situation. Yes, he's won an MVP. We've seen the ceiling, but he's missed 10 games the last 2 seasons and a playoff game. So 11, if you count that last one. And you add to that a little bit of inconsistency as a passer. You add to that the fact that, it's just, they've gone through offensive coordinators now. Todd Monken's the offensive coordinator, was Greg Roman. I kind of don't blame the Ravens for doing it this way, even though I think it's not politically popular in the NFL right now.
Look, I am way behind Eric DeCosta and John Harbaugh as far as this approach. I love the idea of it, to be honest with you. 32.4 right now, right? Versus 45. Mm-hmm. It gives you an opportunity to see what's out there and what type of teams are going to be truly interested. If I can flip over to my old team for a minute, there's a lot going on in Atlanta right now, right? I've reached out to a few people. I wanted to get a gauge of where the fan base was of, their declaration that they are not interested in moving forward. Most recently, I think it even was today or yesterday, with a guy like Lamar. And, when I start thinking about that, think about it. For them, first of all, to give away 2 picks in an organization that's been struggling a little bit, as you know, coming off of, I say this humbly, but I also say it realistically and honestly. They were in a situation that they were dealing with their pick situation. They need to continue to build with their picks, to give away picks. They were in a financial situation that they had to work through with Matt Ryan and Julio Jones. So here they are in a cleansed way, so to speak. I understand why they might not go this direction and why they don't stay with their quarterback right now. They're at the 8th overall pick. They have an opportunity to pick a legit quarterback, I believe. And I think it's a smart move, by Terry Fontenot and Arthur Smith, as far as backing away from it.
Well, if you're Terry Fontenot, you've gone through he came in and there was your fingerprints on the team, but and there were some really good players on that team, and he decided to sort of change course, and he's done it his way, for better or worse. You go tight end at 4, you go wide receiver at 8, and you get rid of Matt Ryan. You go actually you go after Deshaun Watson, you piss off Matt Ryan. Matt Ryan ends up being traded to the Indianapolis Colts. Those are the reports, of course. You try to rebuild the defense. There's still some, again, the offensive line still has a lot of your fingerprints on it with McGarry and Matthews and Lindstrom and the guys that have really developed since you took them. And then on the defensive side of the ball, there's still Jarrett, there's still AJ Terrell, but you're building, trying to build around those 10 poles on that side. And if you trade 2 first-round picks for Lamar Jackson and it doesn't work, you are going to be remembered. That's your legacy as general manager. And we talk about this, it's always funny. I hope you swell out with pride a little bit. But, when you did that panel at Sloan, they said, the average general manager gets 3 years median, right? And of course you got 4 times that. Most guys don't get to kind of have multiple moves that are signature for them. And if you are Terry Fontenot and you've tried, to go a certain way, whether it's right or wrong, that's not even the point. But if you try to go a certain way and then Lamar Jackson presents himself and you go, and then you're like, look, I guess I have to because of, X, Y, and Z, and it doesn't work. You do really want to hit the pillow at night the rest of your life and say, my general manager career is centered around something I didn't even want to do, and it was inconsistent with the rest of my career. That's tough. That's a tough sell.
I have been completely outspoken about this, and I think anyone who really follows the league, general managers, to your point, are going to be judged. We've said this time and again, and I don't mean to be repetitive, but it is the way it is. And it is about being judged on how you acquire and how you maintain your quarterback and how you hopefully parlay it into 2, 3, and beyond contracts. Not always that easy. The great thing nowadays, I will tell you, and this came up in the Sloan discussion, I think I wanted to talk about it more, the fact that today's general managers are open to moving on from their first-round quarterbacks, which normally is an albatross around your neck. Oh my God, if you're a GM and your owner watches you cash in on a guy that you spent time and draft booty in the first top 10, 12 players in the draft, that's a big deal. But you have guys right now like Howie Roseman, Les Snead, who else? Joe Douglas, right? I'm trying to think who else. I'm just trying to think. And that whole group.
I mean, Tampa Bay with Jason Light, moving on from Jameis, Tennessee, John Robinson, moving on from Mariota. There's all these and guys who were moderately successful. Jameis wasn't a nightmare. He was not, but he was not a disaster. Mariota wasn't a disaster, but these guys, you usually fight through, right? You remember, and remember when Vinny Testaverde was taken, right? And Tampa Bay, he threw 36 interceptions one year. He threw, he was pretty terrible for them, right? And Tampa tried and tried and tried and tried and tried and eventually didn't work, right? Same thing with Jeff George with the Colts. It's like tried and tried and like that was the point. Now guys can move on because the financial investment isn't as much, but as you could probably tell, there are extraneous, like you got to change all the billboards, you got to change all the banners, you got to like when you change quarterbacks, it's more than just kind of on the field stuff.
It is a ballsy move by these guys. I mean, think about it. You put yourself on the line with your owner, your fan base, the media, and everyone thinking, wow, you have an opportunity to pick 2 quarterbacks in this league, just like you have an opportunity to pick 2 head coaches. Sometimes you do, sometimes you don't. The fact that you are not as a general manager, they aren't as a general manager, so incredibly focused on what we often are as general managers, and that is focused on retention rate. I mean, that's the easiest way to go into an owner and say, hey, look, we haven't won a Super Bowl, but our retention rate is 70, 80, 90%, whatever the number is. You can get caught up in that as a general manager. It's not easy to do it. When you can take a deep breath and say, I'm doing what's best for the organization. I would say this to all the rising executives. That is a big deal to see how things are changing in the league right now. And to see some of these guys who are the best general managers currently in the league doing it, surviving and thriving after, I think is a real boon for the general manager world.
Yeah, and we'll see what happens with Lamar. I do think that there's going to be some coming to Jesus moment, whether or not, and there's a lot of people that are crying collusion. I don't know. Like I do think, like, you ask of the teams that can afford him, how many teams would want to afford him? And I think like many of us would be like, hey, and I do personally think, like, look, you look at the tracking data, he is a force multiplier in the run game, and he is a better passer than people give him credit for. However, there are options that are, I mean, look, CJ Stroud is a guy, and I'm not, we're going to talk about quarterback evaluation in a second here, but CJ Stroud is a guy I look at, I'm like, man, that's a pretty narrow distribution relative to other rookies. I'm not saying relative to guys who are playing, but I'm like, that's a guy that, like, if you get him in the building, I can very easily see you building a situation around him where relative to cost, he's a very good value. You look at Anthony Richardson. I mean, that guy's a better athlete than Lamar Jackson already. And, you can build an offense around him. If you're the Bears, that's the other team. Like, the Bears have almost $100 million in cap space, but if you like relative to cost, Justin Fields is, you can see it as far as like that guy might be a surplus value relative to cost. And so you look down the list, maybe Detroit could be a team, but Detroit's picking, in a decent spot where they can get one of the other guys in the draft. And so you just look around and we see this injustice about Lamar. And I'm the first guy to say, like, I do think some people are down on him relative to what I would expect, but it kind of makes sense. You look at Eric DeCosta, you think that's a good gamble the guy made, right? As far as,
yes,
forcing another team to negotiate, because they've gotten so sideways player and team that maybe now Lamar's like, well, maybe the Ravens don't hate me. Maybe it's just, they're just trying to win and there's dollars and cents associated with this. And it was really Cleveland who erred by giving Deshaun Watson the fully guaranteed deal when no one, because reports were that, like, once he won the fully guaranteed deal, that's when Carolina, New Orleans, and Atlanta were like, and so maybe it was just one team that would give Deshaun that deal, and no one's really like sort of said that to Lamar.
So, man, there's so much here to talk about, and let's stay on it for a little bit longer if you don't mind, because it is a world's topic right now. First of all, I think it would be irresponsible of us if we didn't talk a little bit more about the idea of collusion. I'm not meaning more, put a collusion aside and the topic, the owners and collusion. I get it. Let me just say this: as general managers and owners in the league, of course, you're always looking at big money guaranteed, and you're looking at anything that might inhibit your opportunity to get things smoothly accomplished. You get agitated with that. Collusion aside, it's not a matter of in my mind, that it's more about, yeah, I'm agitated. I want to get this deal done. I would love to go after a guy like Lamar Holmes, given all of his abilities. But the fact that, he's going to be looking for guaranteed money, $230+ million. That's a big, big deal for any general manager to think he has to go into his owner, again, swallow deep and look at the owner and say, yes, sir, I think we have the right guy. That's a big, big deal. You go ahead.
Yeah, and there's the other part of this which no one is talking about this, and I if we care about the players in this league and we care about the sustainability of this league, I think a lot of people are saying, you're wage suppressing, right? And I see it differently. Right now, there are more players in the NFL that make the minimum than there ever have been as a percentage of the number of players. Like, the more that we do this, the more that we set this precedent for quarterback. And I'm a statistician. I'll say, like, the quarterback is the most important thing. If you get a Patrick Mahomes, your whole life becomes easier. But we all talk about, like, why have we hollowed out the league in some way? And it's like, well, it's because these quarterbacks, like Daniel Jones making 40 million APY is an absurdity, right? Like, and I like the guy. He reminds me of Alex Smith, and I have great feelings about Alex Smith with his time with the Chiefs. But, like, Alex never made more than 12% of the cap. Daniel Jones is making like 16 to 18 as a percentage of the cap. And then you're looking and saying, well, why do the players have to act desperately in their career? Because there's no middle class in the NFL. And part of that, like, that's where we should be looking. And when we think about quarterbacks who are taking up a huge fraction of the cap, then you can't pay the offensive line. Then you can't pay the wide receivers. And you wonder, there was an NFL record this year for number of quarterbacks who started a game this year other than the 87 strike year. And you're like, well, yes, because you've reduced offensive line and wide receiver and all this stuff that protects a quarterback because the middle class of the NFL is gone, right? And so I don't think that gets brought up when we think about, oh, woe is Lamar Jackson. I get that, and he should get what he deserves, but we're in a cap league, right? And so if he gets what he deserves, then all these wide receivers and it makes the league weaker, in my opinion, much like the regular economy, not to get political, but like as you hollow out the middle class of everything, it makes the thing less resilient.
Great points. I want to ask you something. I want an analytical assessment on this. This was brought to my attention today. You have a draft situation as it is with the Bears and potentially moving back. It would take 2+ first rounders, right? It's the interesting parallel is going to take 2 first rounders if you were to acquire someone like Lamar Holmes, right? If you were to match the sheet. From an analytic perspective, people presented to me today, why wouldn't you just go with something that is much more of a surefire by taking a guy like Lamar versus you're going to wing it and you never know on the collegiate side? What's your stance on that?
Well, it's all about variance, right? So the fact of the matter is Lamar Jackson has shown us really high highs, but I would stake a significant amount of money on the fact that we're never going to see Lamar produce like he did in 2019. Like, I think we've seen the maximum of Lamar Jackson. And that maximum is great. Like, we've already seen that. But his distribution is narrow and his cost is high, right? So you're only like when you do and we call this net value or surplus. A lot of people call it surplus value. We call it all this kind of stuff. Like, basically what you want to optimize for is surplus value. You want to optimize for value created on the field relative to cost, right? And we've talked about that. Like, and so Lamar Jackson very well in his best season could produce a $60 million APY season, but that's going to cost you $50 million APY. So you're getting a $10 million surplus value. And so $10 million surplus value, that's like the value, the first pick is about 15 million, right? So you're not even getting the first pick back in surplus value. That's the tricky part. When you get a guy like, let's even say the guy's like an average quarterback. Let's say you get CJ Stroud and the guy's worth 30 million. He's making 8 to 10. So you already have 20. That's twice as much surplus value. And now, and what if he ends up being an MVP guy like Lamar was when he was on his rookie deal? Then you're talking about 50, 60 million at a cost of 5 to 10. That's where you get that huge value. And then that's where you can like paper over mistakes on the rest of your roster. That was what made, the Kansas City Super Bowl so special, which was Mahomes is making, depending on the cap hits, 35 to 45. And he's producing, above and beyond that, but not that much above and beyond that. Right. So then a guy like Brett Veach has to really make his money going around the roster, making sure there weren't negative surpluses anywhere. when you have a quarterback that makes all that money, right? The fact that you give up all that draft capital means you give up so much in the way of roster, but you're getting that back with the quarterback possibly giving you the 50 million surplus. And that's where the value proposition is of the non-sure thing. It's that when he hits, the rest of your roster, that multitude of sins, that gets washed away.
Excellent explanation. Before we move on, brother, think about this. I don't want this to get lost. As a general manager, I'm not answering for Eric DaCosta. This idea that I know has been talked about of being a player that represents himself, does not have a legit representation, is a big, big deal. It's a big deal.
Yeah.
Whether I don't know if you read some of the dialogue in Mike Florio's stance today on it. I mean, he hit the nail on the head on it basically. But as a GM, that is a concern. Not only because you're sitting here thinking about today's deal, you are thinking, even if you did get a deal done, who are you going to be dealing with in the next 2 or 3 years when there is a restructure potentially? Are you dealing with the player again? This is really interesting. And then the flip side of it is the benefits that Lamar would have had if he were to have really solid representation right now, coming off of this whole unrestricted idea. I just unrestricted. What I'm blanking here.
So if he was on the street as a free agent, like he would have.
Yes.
He would. I think that Bomani Jones said something great about this, because I think everybody's like, well, he should represent himself. It's your skill set in this world is throwing touchdown passes and running for touchdowns. It's not representing yourself. And, we've all been in negotiations where somebody will say something and they're just trying to get an angle in edgewise with us, but that offends us, right? They're like, oh, I think you're the 5th best general manager in football. I don't think you're the first. Like, that might offend you. Now your agent is there to hear that so that you don't have to. Yeah. So that when you go in and Arthur's like, hey, we're boys on stuff. But like Lamar's had to hear that to his face. And so there's hurt feelings there and there's all this stuff. And you just need and Bomani said something else too, and it's true for media people as well. Like, you don't have the time for that, right? And there's an emotional toll, and there's a reason that people of means like pay people to take on some of the BS because it's exhausting. And just being an agent is like one of those parts where they like. And the other part about agency, which is true as well, and we know this because you've obviously had an agent, and like in the league is like, if you screw over an agent with one client, then you got to answer them with another client. And like, you just know that over time, you've just got to play the guy down the middle because you're going to win some and you're going to lose some. And and if the guy, and I dealt with this with agents who only have had 1 or 2 players, and they're the biggest pricks because they don't understand that part of it. This is the one guy they got to get every ounce out of. Whereas like, if you have more obviously clients, then you'll win some and you'll lose some. And over time, it'll evolve just like anything.
So non-exclusivity was where I was going when I blanked there for a second too. And you did a great job following up on it. Being a guy who's in a non-exclusive situation like this, who are out there, the ideas of, an agent having relationships with other teams and stirring up this feigned idea that people are interested. There are so many levels to that I think, I don't know how he approaches it. And look, in the end, there's a reason at many levels how much longer, when you're in a spot like Eric DaCosta is, and I do not want to answer for him, and Coach Harbaugh, how long is this going to play out, and how agitated were they truly with this whole tap dance, right? Yeah. And now the last thing I'd say, and then I'll turn it over to you is, here we are. We talked about linebacker signing, right, which was a big, big deal, and they got it done like that. This, I continue to say, this speaks volumes. I don't know what it's speaking, but it speaks volumes.
Well, and Roquan was another guy. He had kind of a faux agent, but it wasn't and again, it was about hurt feelings with the Bears. And then you go to the other side of the fence, and that next girl, she's a lot nicer to you, right? Like, and so that's kind of how these things work. And Lamar sees that, and he's like, well, wait a sec. You just got this deal done with Roquan. What about me? We've been talking for years. I've actually produced for you. This guy played for 6 games or whatever. It's all tough, and it's all easier if you have a person to explain these things to you. And again, there's always, we talk about this with the Jeff Saturday signing or the head coach interim side. It's like when you go against the cultural norms of the league, people are just in any way, they're always going to be like, hey, who do you think you are? And I think with Jackson, he's like, well, I'm the MVP of the NFL. And it's like, yes, but you've also like won 1 playoff game and missed 11 games the last 2 years, including playoffs. And so, and there are probably 3 or 4 guys who are clearly better than you. That's where it gets really hard. This is where I kind of want to bring this. And I know we probably won't get to the whole quarterback eval thing. We'll probably save that for Monday, but I do want to talk to you a little bit about one fundamental question to this, because I was at one of the mentorship programs at Sloan. We obviously want to get more people into this space, and obviously both of us have a huge heart for that. So we were at this luncheon at Sloan, and I got to sit down next to somebody with the Phoenix Suns. We were talking, and I love basketball, and I'm very ignorant to how the NBA works. So we were talking back and forth about how to do stuff, and he said something that I obviously believe, but I didn't have the right wording. And he just said, look, he's like, for 90% of the players, how good they are doesn't really matter. It's all about how much they cost, right? And where they are in the development cycle. And I think this entire time, I just said it for the first time, how good Lamar Jackson is almost irrelevant to this entire discussion, right? Like, if Lamar Jackson were willing to take the deal that the Ravens gave him, none of this would be a thing. And if the Ravens were willing to pay him the fully guaranteed contract, none of this thing would be a thing. And I feel like Lamar Jackson has been this, he's been that, he's been kind of really good at times. He's carried that team on his back. But what really makes it interesting for quarterbacks, I think, is obviously how good you are matters. But you look at like Derek Carr, Daniel Jones, Geno Smith have all been kind of like really variable during their career, and they mostly got the same, APY, right? It's like the market kind of tells you what the market tells you, and I wouldn't want any of them at that price.
I get it. I mean, the price is huge. The injuries are huge for me. I mean, look, I'm still perplexed by what happened with the coordinator that's been there. How long was he there before they moved on, or it was a mutual parting, right?
Talking about Greg Roman?
Greg Roman, exactly.
Yeah.
Greg is a very smart football man. I start factoring all of those things in from afar, and there's a lot on Eric DeCosta's plate. And most recently, I hate to take it away from the money because you're spot on. Recently, they have the fact that Ozzie Newsome has come out and made comments over, I think, the last couple of days, really strong comments in favor and making sure that everything is in a good place with Lamar. That's a really big deal from a person who is a Hall of Famer, one of the very best at the GM position, who's been quite quiet for a while. He's kind of stepped out there, probably taking a little bit of the pressure off of Eric and not getting involved. I don't know what their relationship is, nor is it necessarily my business, but I find it fascinating that Ozzie has stepped out and talked a little bit about that. Any comments on that?
No, it's very interesting. I mean, Ozzie was with you with Cleveland, right? I mean, that's like all the way back to the mid 90s. And like, he certainly carries a lot of weight in that franchise. And I think it's important. I mean, we've seen it with Eric Dickerson, both with the Rams and the Colts too. It's like when you have to, I mean, look, players understand players better than front office people do. I think, in my opinion, I just think things are so sour with Lamar and the team that it just nothing might work here. But it's very interesting. And it's so, I think about when we try to evaluate these players and we're trying to evaluate their traits and all this kind of stuff. It's so funny because all the stuff that you're going to talk about, and we'll talk about this on the next episode on Monday, because I think it's such a great topic. But like with the quarterback, at this point, they're all sort of filtered out, right? Like there's a certain level of ability and you kind of tier them out. And there's these mid-tier guys like Carr and Jones and Geno. And there's the guy that's the best player in the league, which is Brady. And then it was Mahomes. And there's that kind of other group like Burrow and Herbert and guys like that who are, I'll pay them anything, right? Like there's the strictures of the league, but those guys, I'll pay anything to keep them on my team. And I think Lamar is kind of in that area. But now it gets down to all the stuff that analytics guys like me really can't tap into, which is what kind of a leader is he? How good is he as far as what is he in, like, in the community? How much, ticket sales as far as jerseys and all that kind of stuff, and all that does that break a tie for you in many ways if you're a general manager? Because when I talk to you about a certain quarterback in the league, and you're just like, Eric just doesn't have it in those areas, right? That's why, your stats like him, but we would never have touched him with a 40-foot pole. And like, there's aspects of that too. And it's, I think very, I think instructive as far as now, once you're into this area and it's completely untapped from an analytical standpoint.
Man, this is such a great topic to lead into for next Monday. And I think any of our buddies who are quarterbacks by trade, your buddy JT O'Sullivan, right? I mean, he understands that the mark is so much higher, right? It could be from a football intelligence standpoint to a community person to athleticism. What a quarterback is and what a quarterback has to live up to is huge. It's high pressure stakes. It's unbelievable, much more than some of the other positions that you can just be a really good athlete and do your thing, have a good understanding of football and move on. So much is held over the quarterback's head. So when you're talking about not only all the money, when you're talking about building an organization over the next 5, 7+ years, and you're looking at your owner as a general manager saying, look, man, this is the guy that is going to carry it. I'm putting my lifeline on this. You better believe that it's not just the guy moving around the field throwing a cannon down the field. There are so many things.
Well, I even think, like, I'm a big fan of, like, the old Eagles teams, right? With that defense with Seth Joyner and Reggie White and Jerome Brown and all that. And then they had the quarterback Randall Cunningham, and like Randall was so physically gifted. So I mean, Randall was kind of one of the first of this ilk of, guys that ran, guys that did it differently. And, Randall was amazing, but he got benched like 4 out of the last 6 years of his career. And you go back and this shows you how much of a nerd I am, Thomas. You go watch those old games, you read those old newspapers, and those defensive players in the media would talk to Randall through the media, like roll their eyes at him, like, why are you going to the beach with Halle Berry? Why are you doing? And it's like, and you're thinking about Tom Brady. You think about why he won 7 championships. Part of it's luck. I mean, I mean luck in the noisy sense. But the other part was, when did a teammate ever MF Tom Brady in the media? Like, when did a Chiefs player ever say, you know what, Pat, and I'm going to get sensitive here. Pat's wife and brother got to stop TikToking, right? Pat got his brother and wife to stop TikToking because he read the room. That's a leader, right? And I don't want to throw shade at Randall, but like, there was always this aspect of certain guys where the talent was there, and the question was, why does this guy got a personal assistant? Why does this guy got an office in the Denver building, right? Why are all these things? And there's this like edge case stuff that can make or break teams.
Wow, we were talking about this, just so everyone knows. We reached out early on. I don't know if I mentioned this. We had 40+ former general managers, former head coaches, and choice players that were part of our ideation pods. And it all had to do with how our approach was to creating certain metric trees, et cetera, et cetera. We'll talk about it another time. Interestingly enough, one of the most impressive people in the entire function that we were dealing with was Warren Moon. You want to talk about an unbelievable leader with an unbelievable mind and a presence. No one, whether he was in the CFL, your beloved CFL that you love, or whether it was in the NFL, it was amazing. And it was amazing to listen to him that many more years later, talk about what he's talking about. And it's amazing.
Well, and you think about what he had to overcome, right? Like, I think, you obviously, he was a really great quarterback at Washington. Everybody wanted him to be a safety because he was black, right? Like, and at the time, and he goes to the CFL, plays in Edmonton, probably, one of the most northern parts of Canada. He wins a bunch of Grey Cups. He's one of the first free agents in the history of the NFL. And like, there are stories of like fans throwing melons at him, like doing really racist things to him while he's trying to be the first black quarterback to ever do anything substantial. Of course, Doug Williams won a Super Bowl. There were guys before him. And to have the mental fortitude to not only just simply exist in the NFL, but also set a ton of, records for guys. If you added up CFL and NFL, the guy had the most passing yards at one point in the league. And, there's just a mental fortitude associated with being able to do those things. Now, he eventually had to leave, and there were, at Houston, like they got rid of him after they didn't win in '93 and stuff. But ultimately, yeah, that's a leader. I mean, there's a great story, and I think my favorite player growing up was Chris Carter, growing up in Minnesota. And there was Chris had won a got a 1,000-yard season, made a Pro Bowl, and they traded for Warren Moon in '94 to be the quarterback. And Chris was a loquacious guy, as you remember. Chris went back to the huddle and said, "Hey, Warren, I was open on that play." And Warren grabbed him by the collar and said, if you say that to me again, I will bury you in this offense. And I think, and of course, Chris set the record 122 catches in '94. So he obviously went in line, but that's a quarterback, right? That's a quarterback, is a guy that'll, when people give Troy Aikman a lot of stuff. When Troy Aikman walked over to the Dallas huddle and took a knee, everybody shut the hell up. And that included Michael Irvin, the guy who, did not lack for words. And there's aspect of that position that just does not show. I think it obviously shows up in the numbers, in the sense that if you're a great guy, all of that stuff will apply eventually, but it's tangible to the position.
You can have really smart guys out there, as mentioned. You can have guys with huge guns. You can have guys that move around, athletes, whatever it is. I mean, when we start talking about, you have to have natural leadership. You have to be able to carry not only the offense, your receivers and running backs who are hoping that you run the ball to them or throw the ball to them so that they get their new contracts. You have to lead the defense too. And the people out there that know that position know that that's the differentiator, meaning they have to have the entire organization behind them. And I would also say what's really important before we finish off today, and we'll get into this, that quarterback has to have an incredibly close relationship with your head coach.
Yep.
Not necessarily with the general manager. You'd like to have a good relationship, of course, but you have to have a really tight understanding. It's not always going to be fun, but you have to be able to communicate clearly. You have to be able to have a respect for each other, and you have to be able to close the door and work through the issues that are presenting themselves, whether it's scheme related or, quite honestly, look, there were times when you're dealing with a quarterback as a general manager, jumping over for a second from the head coaching spot. The quarterback is not telling you who to cut. The quarterback is not telling you who to sign. The quarterback, however, is giving you an opportunity to look at it holistically and look at your team and talk about where he might be feeling there are some elements to the team that are lacking. And it's not necessarily the players. It could be, look, we need to bolster up A, B, and C on our offense versus X, Y, and Z. To hear that from your quarterback, who is completely vested, who's the first one there and the last one leaving, you better damn well believe that I'm listening to him. He's not making the calls. He's not, sorry, George Payton, I'm not throwing this. He's not getting an office in the building, but he is damn well involved with me as a GM and the head coach for sure.
And that is so hard, right? Because obviously, I think of guy, your quarterback can't be the guy who's like, I just work here. That's really the ultimate point. Like, your quarterback is invested in the team. And I think that there are guys that, you look and again, like, I'm an analytics guy. I want to go by the numbers, and I really do want to find a metric that stacks them perfectly. But there are guys, in the league where, and this is why it's good to be embedded and have contacts, obviously, like you, but also people in the league where I'm just like, what do you think of this guy? And they're just like, look, it's not a leader. And people roll. You can't have the other people on your team rolling their eyes at the quarterback, and it just can't happen. And once that does happen, and this is where I really hope Sean Payton can sort of build the thing back up in Denver, because people are rolling their eyes at the quarterback there, and the quarterback is a very good player. So how do you even redo that? Like, I've taught, and again, I was a tight end. I've played with quarterbacks. The quarterback on my senior year was the conference player of the year. He was a guy, when he walked in the huddle, you shut the hell up, right? Like, there are I've seen it good and bad, right? When the guy is, no one respects the guy, and I've seen it with a guy everybody respects. But there are other parts of life. Like, if you're a professor and you lose control of the class, it's really freaking hard to get the control of the class back.
Right.
All of these things, like, the quarterback has to understand those things intuitively, right? That has to be part of who they are as a guy, or else it's just going to be really hard.
Great. And we're talking all about here. You're exactly right. We've seen leaders in that spot who are tough asses and could take anyone and literally would fight anyone. That sounds a little odd, but they would go, they're not intimidated by the 6'7", 290-pound pass rusher, whatever it may be. But those guys aren't necessarily always the best leader either. This comes back in today's world. You can argue it or not. Anyone out there with professional or PhDs in leadership understand that the empathic leader is very, very important in today's world. It's important as GMs and head coaches. It's definitely important as a quarterback that you have to have an awareness. If you are lacking in awareness and lacking in authenticity, man, you were on a track to failure in my mind as a leader.
Yeah, and I think to close out, I think that that's ultimately the divorce between the Packers and Rodgers is that at the end it was sort of, and I hope he can get this back because again, I do think that Aaron is one of the best players period to ever play the game, but there's a little bit of acting out to sort of like prove himself as a guy, which feels like over the last few years, and I think if you go to a place like the Jets, you can kind of start anew, right? It's sort of like you grow up somewhere, you go to college, you can kind of be a new person type of thing. I hope for Aaron's sake that he gets that where he goes next, because it just feels like, it just feels like so long in Green Bay is had so much success. And for whatever reason, that wasn't fulfilling to him. That's the impression I get. You go to New York, maybe, you have some success there. You learn I know when Brett Favre went to the Vikings, he reclaimed that, right? He had a really good time with the Sidney Rices and the Percy Harvins of the world. And he reclaimed that. I hope that for Rodgers, because ultimately Rodgers is so talented that he's been able to be so good, but you see how fragile that is. Once it sort of went away and now he's on McAfee every single week and stuff like that, it was hard for him to reclaim the brilliance that he had early in his career. And that's a guy who's as a 10 out of 10 talent wise and probably an 8 out of 10 leader. Even that is maybe not enough, and he's got to go to a different team to reclaim that. And I really hope that he can, because I think, otherwise we're robbed of one of the great players that's ever played the game.
Great point. Thanks for sharing.
So, and we really appreciate you all coming. We didn't get to the quarterback evals. I actually think it's serendipitous because we've normally done the evals on Monday, so we'll just continue the quarterback stuff on Monday. We did have an all-time high for listeners on the show on YouTube, which is fantastic. We thank you all for coming. Please hit the like button on the way out. It doesn't cost you anything, but it does benefit us. Go and see sumersports.com. This podcast will be there as well, but there'll also be written work. I know our own Parker Fleming's doing a really bang-up article pretty soon here that'll go on the site. And also anything that Thomas has been involved in. I know you did Maggie and Perloff today. And there'll be other parts. I know Tage did a podcast recently. I know all our stuff from Sloan will be up there as well eventually once they post it. So there's tons of stuff. Sumer Sports, we're growing in that public facing realm. We really want to give the sickos, the football fans that can't get enough, we want to give you everything that you deserve. So for Thomas Dimitroff, this has been Eric Eager. This has been episode 36 of the Sumer Sports Show.